Tesh Dile and welcome to Tibet this week. This is Sakina Bhatt with another edition of Weekly News on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Central Tibetan Administration. Let's look at the headlines first. His Holiness the Dalai Lama lauded government's effort in fight against COVID-19, donates to India's PM Cares Fund. Department of Information and International Secretary calls China serves Emancipation Day a drama to mislead the international community. Tibetan monk aide of Tulku Tenzing Delek Rinpoche dies at 60 after prolonged illness and imprisonment. Central Tibetan Administration's Department of Education introduces online learning resources during lockdown. The first ever virtual conference with North American Tibetan Association presidents. His Holiness the Dalai Lama lauded the governments across the world for their efforts into tackling with the coronavirus. In a special message written by His Holiness on Monday this week, His Holiness said that it is natural to feel anxiety and fear at this hour of crisis. However, he mentioned saying, if there is something to be done, do it without any need to worry. If there is nothing to be done, worrying about it further will not help. His Holiness also appealed to all concerned to do everything possible to care for the vulnerable members of our community whose livelihood is being affected by the lockdown. Lastly, His Holiness expressed his gratitude to the medical staff who are working on the front line to save lives at great personal risk and prayed for an early end to this pandemic. Expressing his support for the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's effort into controlling the threat of coronavirus, His Holiness made a donation from the Dalai Lama Trust to the Prime Minister Cares Fund. His Holiness said that he is grateful for the initiative taken by the Prime Minister in partnership with other SAARC countries to set up an emergency fund and to exchange information, knowledge and expertise to tackle the spread of COVID-19. Central Tibetan Administration's Department of Information and International Relations Secretary Tsawang Gyalpo Arya says China serves Emancipation Day a drama to mislead the international community.
China invented this Serve Emancipation Day to counter the Tibetans' 10th March Uprising Day and also to create a platform where they can spread their propaganda. So they have said that they have emancipated millions of Tibetan serfs and liberated Tibet. So this is all wrong and it's not true. So they talk of democracy, but the world knows that there is no democracy in China itself. So what democracy they are talking about in Tibet? And then they talk of poverty alleviations. So in truth, Tibet was never a poor country. People had enough to eat. And they have also enough ability to explore the spiritualism also. It is only after the Chinese occupation of Tibet that Tibet faced the shortage of food. There was a famine and many people died of starvations. So what poverty alleviation they are talking about? Another thing is the economic development. They say they have made a lot of economic development and then GDP of the Tibet is 160 billion yuans. So many economics analysts say that if this is true, all this money should be going into the 5 sectors. So these 5 sectors are, first is total militarization of the Tibetan plateau, and the second is to maintain the large contingent of army, police force, surveillance and Chinese staff in Tibet. And the third thing is making of the road, railways and airways. So all these are done in order to exploit all the Tibetan mineral resources and take them to China. And the fourth is Tibet is a source of major river of Asia. So they have constructed a lot of dams to divert the rivers at the same time for strategic reasons also. And the fifth point where the money goes is that they are trying to large-scale migration of Han Chinese into the Tibetan areas. This is the 5 sector where all this money goes. And when they talk about the religious freedoms, So since the occupation of Tibet, more than 6,000 monasteries have been destroyed. Even now, the monastery like Larungar and Yashingar, they are facing severe restrictions. And most of the monasteries are being administered by the Chinese Communist Party. So there is no religious freedom. For Tibetans, all these 60 years of Chinese occupation, it is a 60-long year of brutal occupation, suffering, and repressions. There is no emancipation, there is no liberations. In short, this Self-Emancipation Day is a Chinese drama to mislead the international community to believe that everything is okay in Tibet and to legitimize their claim on Tibet. So this is all wrong and false.
Despite the chaos and pandemic it has created around the world with the Wuhan coronavirus, China observed the day in Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet. A Tibetan monk named Tashi Phuntsok, an aide to the late Tulku Tenzin Delek Rinpoche, passed away last month after prolonged illness and imprisonment. According to the International Campaign for Tibet, Venerable Tashi Phuntsok breathed his last on 16th March 2020. Aides of Tashi Phuntsok reportedly told International Campaign for Tibet that his health had been poor ever since his release from Yakra Phuk prison in July 2003. The Department of Education, Central Tibetan Administration, has also prepared online learning resources for primary school children and has advised parents and guardians to keep their wards engaged in studies at a time when staying at home is highly recommended to prevent the spread of coronavirus. The lockdown across India for prevention from the Wuhan-originated COVID-19 pandemic has affected the normal functioning of life. Schools are also closed in accordance with the law, leaving students at risk of losing their valuable learning time. Many educators in Tibetan community have begun providing online classes for students to keep the children on track. Tibetan teachers of Tibetan Children Village schools are uploading learning material online. Daily online lessons for senior school students are also being provided. For the first time ever, the Office of Tibet, Washington, D.C. convened virtual meetings with presidents of Tibetan Associations of North America to discuss the present situation and timely responses in the wake of the Wuhan-originated coronavirus. The meeting was attended by 32 presidents and representatives of Tibetan associations and lasted for 2 hours. Dr. Kunchok Dorji was invited to speak as an expert on the pandemic. The meeting discussed how each Tibetan associations can work with facing the challenge the pandemic continues to persist. New York Tibetan Association has started an emergency response team with a group of Tibetan nurses by setting up hotlines for inquiry. The meeting agreed to add a few lamas and psychologists as resource persons to provide spiritual guidance and emotional help. For any queries or concerns related to the COVID-19, the Department of Health, Central Tibetan Administration has issued the following helpline numbers of medical professionals and dealing staff operating in some of the major Tibetan settlements in India. You can also reach out to the healthcare staff in your respective settlements through the helpline numbers available in www.tibet.net. So much for today and see you next time.